Hi, Ryan.
Hi, Perry. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. Hi, Monty. I see some people I know.
Hi, Perry.
Hi there. Oh, I'm so sad to hear of David Paulson's death. He was such a lovely person. Yeah. Hi, Bill.
Hey, Perry. He was so welcoming to so many people in SABR, Dave.
Yes, he was.
Are they going to continue with the talking baseball chats?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Good.
For years and years and years.
Like 25, he was in charge of those.
Yeah, lovely guy. Hi, Karen. Always nice to see another woman here.
Hi, I know, I'm always in these things.
Good to see you.
It's fun.
Perry,
Yes.
this is Tad. Welcome. Glad you could make it.
Thank you, Tad. Appreciate it.
How's everything? Are you in New York right now?
We got dumped on a little more last night. New
Yeah.
Jersey is just swimming. I feel so bad for people who live there, but we just got a lot of rain last night. Luckily, nothing flooded like last week. But yeah, but I'm leaving. I'm heading west. As soon as this is over, I've got my car loaded up, ready to go. Start driving for the next.
I think I saw a video of you interviewed by the Hall of Fame folks, and you were in your car, and so you
Right. That's right.
You could have just started out, and of course we didn't want to distract you. We do have a couple people who really wanted to join from our chapter, and one of them's got a grandson playing baseball this morning. Now I looked out, it's raining pretty good here, so I was hoping the game got called and he would join us. And
now where's here? Are you in Louisville also?
Yeah, I'm in Louisville. Yeah, we're
Louisville, sorry.
And we got people calling in from Western Kentucky and other locations, Indiana. But we do have a lot of guests that have arrived, emailing me the last couple of days. One of us, either you or me, must be a celebrity. I don't know.
No, I'm very obscure. I'm not a celebrity.
Well, I remember and told people about when you joined for Mr. Kellner's book and sang the theme song to Car 54, Where Are You? Off the cuff, which not only did you know all the lyrics, but you can carry a tune, and now I know why, because you actually were a singer-songwriter for a while, and before you decided to suddenly become an umpire.
Well, I still am occasionally a singer-songwriter. Truthfully, I haven't touched my guitar in a year because I developed a very weird allergy to my guitar strings. And I still have not figured out how to guard against getting a very bad reaction on my hands to playing my own guitar. It's a little weird. But yeah, I not only know the Car 54 theme, but I can also sing George of the Jungle, Tom Swift, Super Chicken, Mighty Mouse. So yeah, I spent my wanton youth watching cartoons on TV and Man from U.N.C.L.E. when I was a kid.
Yeah,
so.
I love Man from U.N.C.L.E.
It's
Man
fine.
from U.N.C.L.E. and Honey West, was that it? With Anne Francis. Loved that show.
I'd get up in the morning and watch the blank screen until something called the Farm Post came on, and some guy out in the field would give you the weather forecast, and then the payoff. Here he comes to save the day.
Right.
Yeah. Well, so I think what I'd like to do, and maybe kind of jump back and cover some of the cool things you did before you one day decided, I'm going to become an umpire, and just go straight to that. Although I would like to know, how did you, I mean, preceding that had to be, I love baseball. Now, where'd that come from?
It came from my love of trivia and the fact that I was a Jeopardy champion at 19 years old, and therefore became an easy target for all of my friends who convinced themselves that if they could beat me at trivia, that meant that they were, you know, great because I was a Jeopardy champion. I was a one-time Jeopardy champion, but I'm still riding that that train 38 years later. Yeah, 1972. And back then Jeopardy did not have a teen tournament or a high school or a college tournament. I was just pitted against adults, and I was lucky enough to win one game. So it was my love of trivia that impelled a friend of mine named Barry Bell, who I knew because of my quasi career as a singer-songwriter, which I spent 10 years just playing my guitar, writing songs and singing in clubs around New York mostly. But I got lucky, and a couple of agents saw me playing in a club called Max's Kansas City, which back in the 60s and 70s was a scene. And the reason I was playing there was because I was the girlfriend of the bass player for another band named Henry Gross. Henry Gross and my boyfriend Gino had broken off from Sha Na Na, which was very big at one time. And Henry Gross went off on his own, and he actually had a couple of at least one big hit. But anyway, I knew Gino, and I was there just to see Henry Gross at Max's Kansas City. They were opening for a guy named Iggy Pop, who had this shtick where he would harm himself during his act, which people seem to get off on. Anyway, he leaped off the stage, presumably into the arms of his waiting fans, but they missed or something happened. He wound up lacerating himself on the floor on shards of glass, had to be carted off to the hospital, and couldn't fulfill his obligation as the headliner. So Henry Gross got bumped up to the headliner, and they asked me to be their opening act. And so a couple of nights while I was there opening for Henry Gross, some agents saw me and started sending me out on this, what they used to call the college circuit. I guess there still is one, where I literally would just take a bus to a school in Connecticut, New Jersey, you know, somewhere in the Northeast that was accessible by bus, because back then I didn't drive. I grew up in New York, and I didn't have to know how to drive. So I would just take a bus, and the college would put me up in a dormitory overnight. And then I would do one 45-minute set for these pretty big names: Bruce Springsteen, Hall & Oates, Jerry Jeff Walker, Billy Joel, who was very nice, by the way, a true gentleman. When he found out that we were picked up at the same time to be transported to the venue, and the bus driver was telling me, "I'm sorry, we don't have a dressing room for you." And I was just saying, well, I'm used to it. I'll figure something else. I just need a corner to tune up in. And Billy Joel overheard the guy talking to me, and he said, "Don't worry about it. You'll share my dressing room. There's plenty of space." And just was very gracious about it. And Bruce Springsteen too was just absolutely a pleasure to share the stage with. So anyway, I did that for about 10 years, just had a lot of fun, never really had much ambition. I sang backup for some bands and toured a little bit, and played and wrote my own songs, got a couple of songs recorded, one by Bette Midler, another by a band named Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show. It was also, and the song of mine that they recorded, they left on the reel for 25 years, and finally just about 3 or 4 years ago they put out a retrospective. The lead singer Dennis LaCourier put out a retrospective called Dr. Hook's Greatest Hits, and they included my song on that album. Finally,
Great.
after
Yeah.
20 years. So, but other than that, I never became rich or famous from my music career. I just had a lot of fun and worked with some really talented, celebrated musicians. And so when my friend Barry Bell, who I knew because he was Bruce Springsteen's booking agent, and I had met him at the school where I performed with Bruce, my friend Barry, as soon as he found out I was a Jeopardy champion, he started constantly challenging me to baseball trivia because he knew it was the one category that I absolutely sucked in. I knew nothing about baseball. I had no interest in it growing up in New York, oddly enough. My brother was into soccer. My mother was into baseball, but I didn't really pay attention to that because I had no interest in it. I went to a private school. My twin sister and I were debutantes, and we were just raised to go to a good school and find a good husband and have a good life. We weren't really geared towards carving out unique careers for ourselves or making a lot of money. It was a pretty conventional, if somewhat privileged lifestyle growing up here in New York. And anyway, so my friend Barry would constantly challenge me to baseball trivia. And one day I just got sick of always sucking. And I went to a bookstore and I literally went like that, picked out 3 books from the bookshelf and got on a plane to go visit my mother in California. And while I was on the plane, I started reading. And the book that I started with was, I believe, Alibi Ike by Ring Lardner, a collection of absolutely hilarious short stories, if none of you has ever read it, written in this crazy vernacular that is just so funny. And anyway, I was floored that, I mean, this hilarious book of comedy gold was about a subject that I knew so little about. The next book I read was Roger Angel's 5 Seasons, which was about the National League, mostly in the mid 1970s. And as soon as I opened it up and started reading about a player named Pete Appleton, who had changed his name from Pete Wojciechowski, some hard to pronounce Polish name. He changed his name to Pete Appleton and had the best years of his career after he did that. And I actually went to the library because I was so interested when I found this out. I went to the library because back then there was no internet and I didn't have a copy of the baseball encyclopedia at my house. But I opened it up and I looked up Pete Appleton, and sure enough, he was right. His original name was that name. He had changed it to. And then I saw birth date, May 20th, which is my birthday. And I don't know, it's just like something magic at that moment happened. I thought, wow, this guy that somebody wrote about in this book that I just happened to pick up has my birthday. There is something very magical about that to me. And then the next book I read was 8 Men Out by Elliot Asanoff. Pete Jablonowski. Thank you, Bill. Yes. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, so.
Jablonowski. Yeah. So anyway, the next book I read was 8 Men Out by Elliot Asanoff about the 1919 Black Sox scandal. And I couldn't believe that from one book to the next, I was rolling in the aisles, laughing my head off with this side-splitting comedy, and then weeping at the tale of these poor suckers who were suckered into this scheme that a lot of them never even made a dime off of and were banished from baseball from. And, you know, a shoeless Joe Jackson, I've always had a particular empathy for. He got shafted, I think. But anyway, it was those 3 books that started me, that made me fall, I call it, they made me fall in love with baseball. So reading books about baseball made me fall in love with it. And for the next year, that's all I did was read about it. I went to the libraries out in Palm Springs where my mother lived. I went to the library here in New York. And remember, this is 1979. So years before the internet or, you know, any type of accessible information other than going to the library or calling the librarian or asking a friend who I knew was very into baseball. So I educated myself for the next year. And then in 1980, I started actually going to see Mets and Yankees games because I knew it was time. I had to decide, was I going to be a Mets or Yankees? I mean, in New York, you got to pick your side. So I went to see the Yankees, and this was 1980, and they were just coming off that, well, they were still in it, that streak of, World Series wins, and Reggie Jackson, Greg Nettles, all those great players. And the Mets were just adorably lousy in 1979, 1980. They they were collectively, they were incredibly inept, although individually, I think they were very talented. Doug Flynn became a Gold Glove player. We had some pretty good pitchers, Pat Zachary, Craig Swan, and a couple of catchers, John Stearns, Ron Hodges, who was just like a bull back there. And I just fell in love with the Mets because they were the underdogs, and there was something very endearing about their ineptitude to me. And so I started going to California to see them with my mother when they were out there, because once I started to love baseball, I really connected with my mother on a completely different level than I ever had throughout my entire life. And at this point, I was 28 years old. I was 28. And so I would go out to, by the way, all this time, I never really had a 9-to-5 job. When I say I had a slightly privileged upbringing in New York, I did. I had some money from my family that kept me in beer and Skittles. I mean, I had to work. I actually went to work in an office working for Gladys Knight and the Pips while all of this was going on. But they were very nice about letting me go early once I started the Umpire, so I could work games in Central Park at 3:00. But I've done everything I can my entire adult life to avoid getting a real job. So at that point, I was lucky. I was able to just, I did this thing. They used to have what they called drive-away cars. I'd call up these companies and say, I need a car that's going to California. And they'd give me the car and a tank of gas. And the only thing I had to do was drive the car and get it there in one piece. Didn't have to pay, for a car rental or anything like that. So I did that for years and years. I would just find cars to drive to California, St. Louis. And this was after I finally learned to drive, which was in 1981, when I started umpiring out in California. And my mother had to drive me to my first Little League game. I was 28 years old, and my mother drove me to my first Little League game and sat there amidst a scrum of parents who were frothing at the mouth. They were so upset with my inexperience, shall we say, because as noble as my intentions were, I really had no idea what I was doing. I'd watched the umpires. I had signed on for umpiring this Little League out there because the strike of 1981 was looming on the horizon. And at that point, my mother and I were driving every night to see either the Dodgers or the Angels, every night. She lived in Palm Springs, and it was about an hour and a half either way, a couple of hours either way. So every night we were doing that. And we became friends with the batting coach for the Angels, Jimmy Reese, the Fungo King. Yeah, he was such a wonderful guy. We met him at a booster banquet because the Angels trained in Palm Springs back then. And when I told him I had just started umpiring in the Little League out there in India, he kind of adopted me, and he would leave us tickets right behind the dugout for an entire weekend series. And my mother would just find like a cheap motel near the ballpark and go to all the games for the whole weekend. And it was just a wonderful way to establish a new way of relating to my mother as an adult. People talk about the connective tissue of baseball between fathers and sons, and often mothers and sons, but seldom between the fathers and daughters or mothers and daughters. And I didn't realize at the time how special that was for me to have a mother that was so into baseball and that could guide my growing interest in it. And it turns out that she was the one that, I call it, she saw something in me that I did not see in myself. And she was the one that cut an ad out of the local paper one night and left it on my pillow. And when I saw it, I looked at it, and my immediate reaction was not, wow, this is great, I'm going to do this right away. It was, what the hell is she thinking, leaving this on my pillow? Because it was an ad she had cut out from a local little league that was in need of umpires for their summer season. And I'm telling you, they must have been desperate, because they literally scraped the bottom of the barrel with me. Because I asked my mother the next day, why did you leave this on my pillow? I mean, I've never evinced any particular interest in umpires. And she looked at me and she said, oh, yes, you have. And I said, wait, what? And she said, well, you wrote a song about an umpire. And she was right. I'd met an umpire, a National League umpire named Ed Montague, the year before in the first aid room at Veterans Stadium, because I used to take the train down to see the Mets play the Phillies, and I'd roller skate from the train station to the ballpark. And this elderly couple adopted me, and they had seats right behind the dugout. And after the games, they would take me down into the tunnel to meet the people in the first aid room. They were friends with them. And Eddie Montague, I guess the umpire's dressing room was nearby, and he would pop in and say hello. That's how I met him. And I'm not going to say it was like falling in love, but it was like instantly recognizing that you're in the presence of somebody very special. He just put out this aura of, I don't know what it was. It was almost like falling in love, but it was more like recognizing his specialness. That's the best I can describe it. And so I wrote a song about him called The Umpire Stands Alone. At that time, I was still writing, still performing a little bit. I didn't actually stop performing until about 1983, when I was already a couple of years into my umpiring career. But she said, my mother said, well, you wrote a song about an umpire. And I said, oh, yeah, you're right. And she said, and I saw you reading a book about an umpire. And I said, oh, I had taken out a book from the Palm Springs library, which was literally the very last book about baseball on the shelf there that I hadn't read. So it was just this last ditch. Oh, it's the only book left about baseball. So I took it out, I borrowed it, and my mother saw me reading it. And that book happened to be The Men in Blue, Conversations with Umpires by Larry Gerlach, who, of course, Bill Nellen knows very well and has worked with. And now I've had the extreme privilege of meeting and becoming friends with at the 9 conferences in Arizona during March. But back then it was just a book that I read that, made, I guess, some kind of impression upon me. But my mother just fixated on me reading that book. She was the one that connected those dots. I wrote a song about an umpire. I was reading a book about an umpire. I love baseball. Okay, my daughter wants to be an umpire. Now, like I said, this was 1981. What mother would ever think that about her daughter, her grown daughter, even today? I mean, the whole sequence of events was so weird and crazy and phenomenal that to this day, I am convinced that I would never have thought of umpiring as something I would enjoy or eventually become good at. I would never have thought of doing it myself if my mother hadn't pointed out to me that, yeah, you should call this little league and try umpiring. So I did. I I dissembled a bit. I inflated my non-existent credentials. I had run to the bookstore and searched madly for a rule book because I wanted to do a good job. And actually, right after she suggested it, I was still resistant. It wasn't like I called them immediately, but after a couple of days of watching the news about the impending major league strike and the thought of not going almost every night to see a baseball game with my mother was just devastating to me. I mean, it was literally breaking my heart. And I was desperate for some physical connection to baseball. And once she suggested umpiring this little league to me, it just seemed more and more every day that it made sense for me to do it. And there was nothing political, nothing feminist about my decision to do it. It was just, I love baseball. I need some kind of baseball in my life, and this is it. So I went out and I looked for a rule book. I studied it as best I could. It was not a regular rule book. It was like this kid's illustrated version. And I mean, seriously, I did not know what a force play was. I'd watched baseball for a year at that point, but I still did not quite grok why they would throw to first base when there was a runner on third running to home plate with 2 outs. That part was beyond my ken at that point. But I started reading the rule book and I went to umpire this little league game, and my mother drove me there and she sat and watched, you know, almost a near riot ensue. It was a game with 10-year-old boys who looked at me like I was a Martian when I first walked out there, and I didn't have a partner. So as often happens in little league, the two coaches picked somebody from the stands to be my partner. Well, the fellow didn't speak English very well. He spoke mostly Spanish, and I speak very broken Spanish. So we had some communication problems to begin with. And needless to say, my umpiring was, I would say, not really up even to little league standards, which are actually pretty rigorous at this juncture. But back then, I don't know if they had any formal training, but like I said, I just called up the assigner over the phone and said, I'd like to umpire a little, and is taken aback, as I think he was, at realizing, oh, a woman is calling me saying she wants to umpire. He signed me on, and I showed up to the office, and he handed me a pair of shin guards and one of those old balloon protectors and a mask, and said, here you go. And that was it. That was the extent of my training, my guidance, anything. And so I got out there and I did my best. And this game went 3 hours, and the parents were not happy with me. And the next day I picked up the local paper, and there were, I don't know, 4 or 5 letters to the editor about this woman that had umpired and turned the game into a travesty. Please don't ever let her come back. And right away, I just sort of adopted the attitude that they're not saying this because I'm a woman. They're just saying it because it was true. I really didn't know what I was doing. As much as I wanted to do a good job, I didn't have the training. But what those people that wrote those letters didn't know was the kind of person I am. And I immediately understood for myself that, yeah, I didn't do a very good job, but I bet I can if I get the right training, if I learn how to do it the right way. So the next day I sent off letters to the 2 existing umpire schools, Harry Wendelstedt, and back then it was Joe Brinkman. And I decided to go to Harry Wendelstedt's because he was a National League umpire, and I liked National League baseball, the Mets, no DH, things like that. So I signed up to go the very next January of 1982. And I knew I was going to be the only woman because I called Harry. So he knew that I was a woman. I didn't want to surprise him, you know, because with my name, it often is kind of a shock. Even now, I called up a guy that I'm working a game with in California in a couple of weeks. And I could tell by the sound of his voice. He said, hello, I'd like to speak to Perry. And I said, this is Perry. And absolute silence for a minute. And he said, I'd like to speak to Perry, the umpire. I said, yeah, I'm Perry, the umpire. I'm your partner. And yeah, it's very funny. Even after 40 years, I still get that. But I don't take offense anymore. I used to, you know, get a little annoyed, but there's no sense in that. I would spend my life being annoyed if I did, you know what I mean? And I don't want to do that. I want to extract every drop of enjoyment and pleasure out of what I do as I can for as long as I can. And I'm pretty sure that's why I'm still umpiring after 40 years. This is my 41st season because I technically started in 1981. And trust me, I would not still be doing this if I didn't love it. Obviously, I'm not in it for the gelt or the glory. I gave up my dreams of becoming the first woman major league umpire a long time ago. It was apparent that was not going to happen for me. So I just set my sights on having fun. That's been my raison d'etre my entire adult life, to avoid getting a real job and to have fun. So,
I was thinking that, you were sort of in this environment of sort of counterculture in the music scene and sort of stick it to the man. And then you decided to
yes.
become the law in baseball, but in a way that was counterculture at the time, and it was sticking it to the man. So maybe
Never
there's,
thought of it that way.
maybe there's a consistency there, and I'm really glad it was you and not Iggy Pop who made that decision. First of all,
Iggy's still around too.
he'd have to wear a shirt. They probably make him put on a shirt, and I don't think he could have managed that. But so then you go to umpire school, and that I'm sure was pretty rigorous process. Kind of quickly walk through when you show up to when you leave happens in umpire school.
Well, I conscripted my identical twin sister to go with me because I did not want to be the only woman. And bless her heart, she went with me. Although we were very different people, and she wanted to major in drinking and I wanted to major in umpiring. So we did not make great roommates, but she was my twin sister and I loved her, and we always found a way to, get it done. And I remember the first night we showed up at the school, the night before classes started, and we were in the restaurant attached to the hotel. And there were obviously a number of other students there. And we were sitting at the table, and next to us, we hear a bunch of umpires go, "I hear there's a couple of broads." And one of them said, "Yeah, I saw one of them. She's a 300-pound bruiser." So, I mean, it was just so funny. And then, of course, the next day, my sister and I show up looking like butter wouldn't melt in our mouths. And so I've always sort of taken a little bit of pleasure in surprising people, that I present the appearance of something very different than what I actually am or do out on the baseball field, which is all business. I'm not out there to make friends. I mean, I can be pleasant and affable, but I'm not out there to seduce or charm anybody the way I am in my real life. So when I went to umpire school right away after I started umpiring, that was the best decision I could have made, because I learned from major league umpires the best way, the right way to do everything out there. And I went back 4 years in a row. Phil Cuzzy and I were classmates all 4 years. And he would not have gotten his job if one of the instructors hadn't gone to bat with him his last year. And he's had a very interesting career, but he's still, a major league umpire and a great guy. But yeah, I went to school with a lot of guys that have already come and gone through the major leagues, and some are still active. And so that's been a lot of fun. While I'm still umpiring myself, just on a different plane of existence. I do mostly amateur ball, although people say I'm a professional umpire when they describe me. The only professional experience I've actually had was when I was on the staff of the Atlantic League, which is an independent league. I worked for the Atlantic League the first 4 years. I kind of set up the infrastructure of the umpiring department for that league, which I'm very proud of having done. And but that's the extent of my legitimate pro experience. Anything other than that, I've umpired Major League Spring Training for the last 36 years down in Florida. And I've umpired international baseball, pre-Olympic events all over the world. Been very lucky that way. But I've never been on the staff of a minor league or a major league, obviously. And there hasn't been. There are 2 women in pro ball, or should be, but because of COVID, it's been crazy. One of them didn't work this past year, which will set her career back a full year, which is very frustrating for me because I've been telling everybody within 5 or 6 years, you're going to see one or both of them up in the major leagues, because I don't think baseball has any legitimate reason to keep either of them off of the major league roster at this point. They're both very solid, very dedicated, very talented. And there are 2 others that got jobs year before last. They went to school, but because of COVID last year, and they didn't work. One of them started working this year. So there should be 4 women in pro ball on their way through the ladder leading to the major leagues. But technically there are only 2. But hopefully you'll see, like I said, one or both of them within 5 or 6 years. It's
Perry, I would say this, that I don't think most of us would be surprised or resistant at all to that. And
thanks.
if a woman came out in a AAA game, no, I don't think it'd be a big deal. But one of the reasons,
Well, one did for 7 years. Her
Pam,
name was Pam Postema.
Yeah,
She was
Pam
in
Postema.
AAA for 7 years.
and she got kind of stalled out. She was good, but they weren't going to elevate her.
Well, I'll
And
tell you exactly what happened.
yeah,
In 1979, a woman named Teresa Fairlady went to Umpire School and got a job. And she called me the day that they told her, well, you got a job, you're going to the Arizona League, which was the bottom of the bottom. And I said, Teresa, guess what? You just sounded Pam's death knell. And 6 months later, she was done because she had served her usefulness. They got rid of her because they had another one that they could point to and say, look, we have a woman. We're not standing in the way. We're doing what we're supposed to do. It was all smoke and mirrors back then. And I tip my cap to those women that worked back there that had the stalwartness and the strength of character to work just because they loved doing it, because none of them ever had a real legitimate shot, as much as I'm sure they would have liked to believe it. Baseball just was not ready back then. Only in the last 10 years have the umpire schools completely retooled, revamped, gotten a new set of instructors, a new set of head instructors. And I like to think some of it is because I've been just such a horrendous pest for the last 40 years. I have not been shy about telling them, you know, do this, do this. And so now that they're not actively obstructing women's entry into the umpire schools or into the ranks of professional umpires, that's not enough. I keep telling them, you can't sit around twiddling your thumbs waiting for that one or those 2 women to show up all magically ready to go. That's what they are waiting for, it looks like. I keep telling them, you have to go out and look, you have to go recruit. And this has been my problem with umpiring since day one, is that the umpires that you see working at the major league level are not the best. Some of them are, but so many more of them could be and aren't. And it's because of the way the system is set up. The umpire schools are the gatekeepers. You cannot get a job in pro ball unless you go to umpire school and grade out high enough in either one of the 2 schools. That means in the top 10% of anywhere from 150 to 200 students, meaning 15 students from each class, about 30 students each year not a whole lot. You have to get into that group to advance to the next weeding out course of umpires that will then be sent out into the low rungs of minor league baseball to start working their way up through a period of anywhere from 6 to 8, 9 years sometimes. Usually the standard is 2 years at each level. And then once you reach AAA, you start being looked at as a vacation umpire. You can do some major league games when the major league umpires go on vacation, but you're not actually a roster major league umpire until you get signed, which can take years of doing that fill-in vacation. So it's a very Byzantine process that takes a lot of patience and fortitude and dedication, and the pay is terrible. And minor league umpires are in the same boat as minor league players. They don't make any money. They are deemed, the lowest of the low class when things are considered in setting up these structures and hierarchies and systems for baseball to function at the minor league level. Umpires are always the last consideration, even in amateur ball too. When tournaments are being set up, they'll say, oh, wait a minute, oh yeah, we gotta call the umpires and let them know that it's raining, and so that they shouldn't come to the game, because if they do, we'll have to pay them. And even then, if we show up when it's raining, we still don't get paid. We get a measly, what they call a rainout fee. It's you have to be willing to make a lot of sacrifices and take a lot of shit. Excuse me. But yeah, it's not easy. And I tip my cap to any minor league umpire or major league umpire. But the system is just set up to accept whoever shows up at the schools. It's whoever has the time and the money, because umpire school is expensive. And it takes 5 weeks out of your life. And a lot of people who go have to give up jobs, or pray that a job will be waiting for them when they go home, if and when they don't get a job as an umpire. It's a very strange way of recruiting. And the umpire, Hunter Wendelstedt and Harry before him, used to say, well, we don't have to recruit. We get enough students every year. And that was very true. It's very true now. They don't have to. They do get enough students. But the students that they get are not necessarily the ones that they would deem to be qualified, or that would have the aptitude, or the constitution, or the character, or the special something that it takes to be a minor or a major league umpire. They don't go looking for that. They just accept what shows up on their doorstep. Like I said, some of them turn out to be great, excellent, but a lot of them, and I saw this with my own eyes 4 years in a row, and I went back in 2005 and nothing changed. A lot of the umpires that make it are, I would call them mediocre. And the reasons they get promoted are political, friends of friends, whatever. It's not merit or talent. And that's what's missing from the paradigm of umpires going to school, getting promoted, and making it to the major leagues. You're not seeing the cream of the crop. You're seeing the cream of who showed up at umpire school, which is not the same thing. And
Well,
so
I
I have a lot of quarrel with that, as I do with the idea that robot umpires are going to replace human ones, which sadly I've come to believe is probably true. You're going to see robot umpires before you're going to see a woman, because I think robot umpires will be ready to go within the next 5 years. And that's going to be a sad day for me anyway, because it doesn't make sense. I mean, I have a lot of quarrel with the technology now. I don't think it's nearly ready. Any technology that calls a pitch in the dirt a strike, just because it bounces up through the strike zone after it hits the dirt, is not, not qualified to be a major league umpire. And they're having problems with that. But they'll fix it, they'll tweak it, and they'll get that technology out there, and you'll see plate umpires standing out there with a little headpiece and, a pitch that's right down the middle of the plate will be called a ball inevitably, and nothing that the plate umpire can do about it because they're, I think, bound contractually to reiterate what they hear in the headpiece or risk, censure or expulsion, which no umpire wants to do once you've worked, that hard, that long to get to that point. So it's a very fraught system. But the level at which I umpire, which is amateur ball, like I said, youth leagues, adult leagues, high school, college, Cape Cod League, Alaska League, international ball. I mean, there's baseball everywhere. And now I do a lot of women's baseball events, which are just the joy of my life, working with girls and women who play baseball. And there's a lot of that now too. So I don't lack for games just because I'm not in the minor leagues or never made it to the major leagues. But I would like to see the system change so that there is some minimal recruitment, especially when it comes to women and women of color, particularly. I mean, back in 1984, 85, which were my 2 last years of school back then, they had a very open, transparent push to get minority umpires, Hispanics, Blacks, Asians. And so when I went to school in 1984, 85, probably 20 out of 150 were minorities. Of course, I was lucky each year there would be one other woman at the school. So there would be 2 women and about 20 Hispanics, Latinos, Asians, Blacks, other minorities. And some of them made it to the major leagues. But I don't know how long that push was sustained. And there's never been, to my knowledge, that kind of drive to recruit, to find, identify, recruit, and train women. They've just been happy now that women show up. And actually, one of them, they kind of did recruit, but she was my protege. Emma Charlesworth Seiler, and they did recruit her. They recognized right away how talented she would become, which I was thrilled, because when I went to school, I always felt that I was judged on what I was at that moment, whereas the men were always judged on what the instructors projected them to become after they had gained an experience and knowledge in the minor leagues. But with me, it was just, she'll never be good enough. She'll never make it. She's not qualified. She doesn't run down to third at the right time. Her voice doesn't sound right. All of the stupid things that they make up to decide that women don't belong, and I've had women umpires that said, well, they told me my voice was too high. And then when I lowered it, they told me it sounded fake, so we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't. But things are changing now. Like I said, in the last 10 years, things are much, much better. Hunter Wendelstedt has told me several times that he wants to be the first one to put one of his students out who became the first woman umpire. And he has a good shot because Jen Paul, who's the senior among the women umpiring now, went through his school. So Emma Charlesworth Seiler went through the other school, which is now called the Academy. It used to be Brinkman, and then it was Jim Evans. But Jim Evans had a scandal and lost his partnership, and rightfully so, because I have always been thankful that I went to the Wendelstedt School, because after talking to several women who went to the other school when it was Jim Evans, and hearing them talk about the just horrible, and I'm talking just hideous treatment that they received by their instructors, and the other students took their cues. One of them was a really good umpire from Taiwan who was on the SABR Women in Baseball panel with me last weekend. Her name is Sophia Liu, and she went to Jim Evans the year before. That year, that they had that party where the instructors dressed up in Ku Klux Klan outfits and thought that it was, funny to take pictures of themselves. I mean, and my thinking was, either Jim Evans knew about it, in which case he that is not leadership, allowing your staff to go out and make a spectacle of themselves dressed up in Ku Klux Klan costumes. Or he didn't know about it, in which case that doesn't speak very well to his leadership either. So I was frankly relieved when the school was taken over by minor league baseball, a guy named Dusty Dellinger, who installed instructors that weren't there were several instructors that were no longer active in minor league baseball, which I always thought was a much better idea, because when I was at Wendelstedt, the instructors were all minor league umpires. And I always was kind of suspicious, like, well, are they really going to put the best students out there when in 2 or 3 years, those same students are actually going to be fighting those guys who put them out for their jobs, because they're eventually going to catch up to them. And as the pipeline narrows going up to the major leagues, the competition gets a lot stiffer. And I had my doubts that the instructors were really putting out the best students for that reason, that they did not want to have to face that kind of competition 2 or 3 years down the road, which is only a normal human thing to feel. I'm not faulting them at all. I'm faulting the system. And so anyway, Dusty realized that and cleaned it up. And now both schools are very actively looking for women to show up. They're still not taking enough of a proactive attitude about it for my taste. Hell, I mean, I'd love to go out and find women to send to them. And there are so many places to look for them in any college athletic program, whether it's basketball, field hockey, softball, to go to the athletes that are aging out of those programs, graduating from college, and say, look, here's a way for you to stay connected to a sport, to make money while you're doing it, to travel, to meet a lot of people. You're not going to make a lot of money, and there will be some hardships, but overall, the experience is just amazing. What I have learned from umpiring, I could not have gotten from 30 years of psychoanalysis or therapy. It's just been such a marvelous, instructive, illuminating journey. And I always say people should go to Umpire School, even if they don't intend to be an umpire, just to learn the Tao of umpiring, the zeitgeist, the way umpires think, because it's so interesting and informative, and it helps people when you're watching a baseball game. Anybody I ever go to a baseball game always tells me, oh my gosh, I love going to a baseball game with you, because you show me a side of baseball that I've never considered. And it's just all so much more interesting when you're there to tell me, watch for the umpires giving the secret signal that they give each other for an infield fly, or, watch the way they do the choreography, a rotation on a fly ball to center with a runner on second and third. It's just a beautiful thing to be able to share with somebody. And I love doing that. So if anybody ever wants to go to a ball game with me, I'm all in. I'll be out in Los Angeles next week. So.
Well, I heard you mention that somewhere else, and usually the fan watches the ball and the runner, and seldom even looks to see who's running to back up the play or anything like that. But really seldom watches what the umpires do.
Very
But
seldom.
you do. Because that's right in your wheelhouse, and yeah, I think that would be really interesting to hear that perspective, and how the umpires communicate. That would be a lot of fun. Now, I want to ask you, you're a writer, you're a very good speaker, you're very articulate, you're educated. when are you going to write your biography?
Bill and Larry Gerlach have been just so supportive and encouraging to me about that. And everybody, a lot of people that I know have too. And I'm just very slow, and getting started is always my biggest thing. And I actually did start writing a book, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago. And I wrote a treatment, what do you call it? That you turn into a book agent, and that they said, because I got an agent after I was on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in 2000. I like to say my twin sister and I were on Twins Week, and we walked away with 6 figures, but unfortunately 2 of them were on the right side of the decimal point. So we didn't make a lot of money. We stumbled on that plateau question, but I did wind up scoring a book agent afterwards who called me up and said, your story sounds very interesting. I want you to write a book. And she was a pretty high-powered agent. Her clients were Judge Judy and Nigella Lawson, and, you know, some pretty famous people. And I spent 3 years writing, what do they call them, Bill? Those things you put with a chapter summary and a proposal. That's it.
Proposal and treatment.
Right. Yeah. So I wrote 3 different proposals. Every one I sent in, she hated. Finally, after 3 years, I sent in one, and she said, I love this. It's wonderful. She sent it to 27 publishers. Nobody bit. So after that, she said, well, I think, you know, our partnership has run its course. Good luck. And after that, I actually felt like I'd been released from bondage, because the reason that she hated the original proposals I sent her was because they were sort of all encompassing about my life as a person, not just my life in baseball. And she wanted me to narrow it just to the baseball and focus mostly on that. And I guess nobody was interested enough in that. But, you know, then I saw on Jeopardy a couple of days later that William Golding had the manuscript for Lord of the Flies rejected 27 times too. And the 28th time somebody decided to publish it. And there you go. So I haven't given up. I'm still working on it. But I like short form writing a little bit better. It requires less of an effort and time. So I like that.
We'll just do chapter by chapter.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Think of it that way, chapter by chapter.
So I've become addicted to this thing called John Boy Media. I don't know if you've ever seen this guy, but
oh, sure.
He's a lip reader. And I used to think that there was a magic word you could never say to an umpire. And then I watched this lip reading. It's like, that's every other word. And the abuse you watch umpires take, I don't think there's no other sport that allows that, where somebody can run out in the field and scream in an umpire's face from, 6 inches away, and, almost physically threaten them, and with the crowd cheering them on.
Interesting the way that happens.
Yeah,
I know. I've never really understood it either. That aspect of umpiring to me has just always seemed so unnecessary and time consuming. And that's what I don't like about it. I like a ball game that just flows and progresses uninterrupted to its natural conclusion without a lot of blips and bumps in the road, which ejections and confrontations are. But yeah, and unfortunately, replay has sort of taken away a lot of that. Although, I mean, you still see managers get ejected for arguing balls and strikes, things like that. But yeah, and trust me, nobody ever tamed their language just because I'm a woman. As a matter of fact, they thought up a few choice adjectives that wouldn't apply to the men. But yeah, and frankly, because of who I am and what I am, I never let an argument go longer than about 20, 30 seconds. In baseball time, that's a long time. to
Yeah.
have somebody there standing at you, right in your face, spitting and, having their veins start to bulge out.
Yeah.
But I just don't allow that. First of all, there are tricks that we learn, like if you see somebody running towards you, to put your arms up like this, so they can't invade your space. And now they're supposed to stay 6 feet away anyway. That's why I used to see managers turn their hats around, so they could get right up into the umpire's face, because otherwise the bills would touch and they wouldn't be able to get as close, which is why when you see a manager do that, it's instant ejection, because that's the reason for it. And every umpire knows it. And it's like the magic word. And speaking to that, there are a lot of words that are said during a discussion, but they are permissible as long as they're not directed personally towards the umpire. So a lot of the time you'll hear a lot of fucks and shits and blah, blah, blah. But as long as it's not "you fucked up" or "you're a fucking idiot," that's permissible. But when it gets into the realm of, "you suck" or "you made you can say "you made a bad call," but you can't say "you're bad." You're just bad, if you do. So, I mean, there are some things that are just immutable. And as much as I don't like, as most umpires don't like to eject ball players, because it means we have to do a report, which is paperwork. It means you have to relive the experience, which can be re-traumatizing sometimes. And it's just a whole thing, ejecting somebody. So we really don't go looking for ejections. We give most players and managers as much rope as we can, but sometimes they just hang themselves and they have to go. So that's all there is to it.
But sometimes they don't go, you eject them and they just stay out there.
Oh my gosh, I've never had that. I mean, if they show any sort of recalcitrance about leaving, you just walk over to the assistant manager, or the next most authoritative figure, and you say, if he's not gone in 60 seconds, you're going to go next. And, so
Yeah.
that way you get him out of there, because nobody wants to see the whole bench ejected. So most of the time they are, I don't know. I don't take any bullshit. And I guess I project that out there because I've very seldom had problems with people leave. Sometimes they'll try to get a little sneaky, and they'll hang around the dugout when they're supposed to be in the parking lot, or they'll shine a mirror from somewhere to send signals. I mean, they get ridiculous, like Bobby Valentine with the fake mustache hiding in the tunnel.
Yeah.
But most of the time when somebody's been ejected, they leave. And especially on a hot day, I don't like to eject people. I'll have people come up and I know that they're looking to get ejected because it's 95 degrees. And I say, hey, if I got to stand out here for the next 45 minutes and sweat my brains out, you have to too. You can call me every name in the book and I'm not dumping you.
I love it. There's a famous video of Earl Reaver going.
Oh yeah.
Weaver, where he's spitting and leaning.
That's Bill
into,
Haller.
Yeah, and the umpire may have brushed against him, and Weaver just goes, "You touched me."
Yeah, with his he pointed. Yeah,
Yeah,
which
yeah. He's
they
just
teach you at Umpire School. Don't do that for that exact reason.
Yeah,
So.
but it's like, you're kidding me. So let's talk for a minute about women baseball players.
Okay.
You probably know this, but there was a woman, and I found that I went to Chattanooga Lookouts game, and I was reading about them on Wikipedia, and I saw Jackie Mitchell struck out Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. She was a left-hander, in succession in 1931. And I said, I wonder if that really happened. And this guy turned around in front of me and said, he said, yes, it did. My grandfather was there. And that allegedly is the reason that Kennesaw Mountain Landis banned women, because the Lookouts had a contract with her. The third strike was to Babe Ruth was a called strike, and Ruth glared at the umpire. So there was a male umpire somewhere in the netherworld who stood up for a woman against the Bambino. And he later was quoted as saying that women shouldn't play baseball. They're too delicate.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And then
I would have loved to hear him say that to his mother.
yeah, multiple. And 52, Ford Frick banned women from baseball. And we had a commissioner right before him, Happy Chandler, who, when they told him there was a vacancy and they were going to, Ford Frick was going to be the next commissioner, he said, so you had a vacancy and you still have it. But I know you're not a big fan of Ford Frick. So talk about, and I know also
He's a bigger villain to me than Walter O'Malley or Horace Stoneham. Yeah, Ford Frick. Yeah, he is, and Kennesaw Mountain Landis, I don't harbor any particular affection for, although I think he gets kind of a bad rap as a racist when he may not have been actively racist, but he didn't do anything to help ease the path of blacks into baseball. He was perfectly happy to let them, be shunned and kept out. But as for women, yeah, he and Ford Frick were two of a kind. And Ford Frick not only decided that women weren't fit to play, because the ball player that you were talking about in 52 was Eleanor Engel, who was signed to a contract with the AA team, the Harrisburg Senators, but was not permitted to play because he stuck his nose in and got together with George Troutman, who was the minor league president at the time. And the two of them threatened every minor league manager with expulsion, with being fired, if they any of them ever again had the temerity or the foolishness to try such a stunt as to sign a woman. And we'll never know if Eleanor Engel, would have been a decent player or not. I think she was a fairly decent softball player, but she was not allowed to play. And then just about a year later, a woman umpire was scheduled to umpire again a minor league game. Why was Ford Frick sticking his nose into minor league baseball? But once he got wind of it, he called up the minor league manager, who had asked a woman named Maureen Galvin, who was a very well-known softball player, and apparently had some umpiring chops. But Ford Frick said, no, this game is too important. The team is going for a postseason slot. She can't umpire. So he kept women umpires out of minor league baseball as well as players. So yeah, I don't like him very much.
Yeah. I want to come back at the end to your, these are at least two of your passions, the museum and Maud Nelson, but I do want to give other people an opportunity to ask questions. So chime
Sure.
in.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to let you know, I was talking to Leslie Heafy, and I bought Jackie Mitchell, The Girl Who Loved Baseball.
Ah,
I just got it, and it's really good.
yeah, Jackie Mitchell had genuine talent. I think she was taught to pitch by Dazzy Vance, something
Yeah.
like that.
He was a neighbor, I think.
Yeah, right. And she had genuine talent, but because of the time and the attitude back then. And it's interesting because a lot of women played baseball and very successfully during the latter part of the 19th century, right up until the 20s and 30s. There were leagues and teams of women that played, but individually, when women tried to break into the men's circuit the way Jackie did, they were treated very shabbily. And she played baseball with men's teams, the House of David, but she came to think of herself as just being a kind of a sideshow, that she was there, to sell tickets, not really to play with any degree of respect or appreciation for her
Yeah,
for
well, that was
talent.
It was Dazzy Vance.
Yeah, Dazzy Vance.
Who worked with
Um, yeah, yeah, it was a shame. And to think of all of the talent that has been lost because of attitudes like that, not just towards women, but Black ball players, and
us.
when Latin players first started playing, same with them, that they were viewed with contempt and suspicion and disdain. How many brilliant, amazing ball players we never got to see because of discriminatory practices and people saying, no, you shouldn't do that. It's, I think about that a lot, what's been lost. So.
Anybody else?
Did Dan Morrison ever instruct you in school, or did you ever run across Danny anywhere?
Dan Morrison. The name sounds familiar. After 40 years, I've umpired with so many partners, I can't possibly remember them all. A lot of umpires, of course, remember me, that I don't remember at all. It's funny how that happens that way. I mean, I'm 68 and I still get guys telling me I had sex with them when I was 19, and I'm sure that I didn't. So I don't know, but yeah, I've had a lot of partners, and the name kind of rings a vague bell, but I can't really tell you why. I might have worked with him, or is he a major league umpire? Or
He got injured. We were college friends. I was just wondering, and I know
Okay.
he taught at one of the schools.
Okay,
Before
well,
he
it's
hit the big
possible I
league.
know him from Umpire School then.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, like I said, I was in school 82, 83, 84, 85, and I went back in 2005. So a lot of umpires were in school with me and have already, had their major league careers and retired, or are now supervisors or doing something else. And I think they're all equally surprised that I'm still umpiring too. But I was lucky that I went to umpire school and learned the right way, and was able to apply what I learned so that the enjoyment factor has far outweighed the the factor of feeling like this is not fun. Somebody's yelling at me. Why am I doing this? It's 100 degrees and I'm wearing equipment. You almost pass out from the heat and don't get a lot of appreciation. And, you're making $60 a game. There's a lot about umpiring that you really have to learn to accept as part of the bigger package. And that bigger package to me is the psychological and the emotional reward of learning so much about human nature, about my own and other people's, through umpiring, through what I observe as an umpire out there on the baseball field, because all of it is so relevant to daily life and to my interactions with other people and my relationships with my friends and my family. And a lot of umpiring is very counterintuitive. Tad, you mentioned chasing the ball when we were talking about umpire choreography, the way a ball player will chase the ball. Well, a lot of umpires are former ball players. I call them reformed ball players. And they have to break that habit. Rather than chase the ball, umpires have to learn to sometimes run away from it to get a better angle on the play when it happens. You can't run straight at it because you'll be looking at it straight on and you'll get blocked out of a tag, between a fielder and a runner, or you won't be able to see a trap that you think you can't, you don't know whether it was a trap or a catch, something like that. I mean, there are so many little tiny minuscule things that can make a difference between an out or a safe or a fair or a foul. And you have to, it takes a lot of training and practice to fight those instincts to do things that you would normally do, but that as an umpire are the opposite of what works. So it's very interesting. And a lot of that works the same with relationships too. Sometimes you have to refrain or restrain yourself from doing what comes naturally because it would be irreparably harmful or non-productive or something like that. And if you're like me as an umpire and you're looking for a particular result, which is usually to get, you know, the manager away from me back in the dugout and get the game started again without too much of a delay and not have to write an ejection report. There are tricks and techniques that I've learned, which, you know, as a person before I started umpiring, believe me, I was very shy and retiring. And now I'm often what I think some people would describe as combative, although I don't think of myself that. I think of myself as forthright, and I speak up and I stand up for what I think is right, or when I see something that I think is wrong, I'll speak up. But umpiring has taught me a lot about how to conduct my relationships off the field as well as on, to get a result that I want, so that I don't wind up having to write an ejection report, or that I don't wind up with an irretrievably broken relationship with somebody that I've been friends with for a long time, or that I wish to continue to have a productive relationship with. So
Some college should give you like a master's or a doctorate in psychology, because I'm sure not, I mean, obviously you've been able to develop a hard skin and also figure out how to, you know, deal with uncomfortable situations, but you've also seen a lot of nuts.
yeah. Well, I grew up in New York. I had a head start. So.
I've never seen this in my lifetime of watching baseball where an umpire has ever reversed themselves, but has there ever been an argument in your whole career where you reversed yourself?
Well, there are situations where an umpire will seek assistance or counsel from his or her partner if I feel that I was blocked out of a play for whatever reason. And hopefully it wasn't that I was out of position. It was, you know, something like a player streaked across at the last minute and you can't plan for something like that. But yeah, we get together with our partners now if we're not sure, because our goal is to get the call right. That's the overarching goal. But most of the time it doesn't pay to reverse a call, even if you think you got it wrong, because players will zero in on that and take advantage of it. And it reveals a vulnerability. And, you know, then they'll start asking you to ask for help on everything, and things just go to hell in a handbasket. But there are certain situations where umpires will reverse a call, and I probably have done it once or twice. But there are many more where a coach will come up and say, will you ask your partner for help? And I'll just look at him and I say, you know what? No, I'm not going to ask my partner for help, because he's over there and I'm over here. I had a much better view of it. And if you think he had a better view, you can stand out here and give me as much heat as you want. That's what they pay me the big bucks for. Go ahead and unload, you know, and usually they just look at me like, and they walk away. But yeah, you want to not change as many calls as possible. Sometimes you got to die with your call. That's just baseball, unfortunately. And, you know, I regard it as the same thing as a shortstop kicking an easy ground ball or an outfielder dropping a fly ball. Umpires are not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. We try and be correct as often as possible, but it's not possible for every umpire 100% of the time to be completely accurate and infallible. That's just not the way human beings work. So, but, so yeah, I may have changed one or two calls once, a long time ago.
I know
You have do you have a favorite memory of one argument that actually made you laugh or that was actually a creative or unique argument? I think of Lou Piniella throwing the bases around.
Oh, yeah.
His famous incident, but did you have anything that you
Well,
laugh about or recall?
Sure. When I was in the Atlantic League, Tom O'Malley, who had been a pretty good ball player in his day, I think had played for the Mets, even the Giants, and he was managing, I think it was the Newark Bears at the time. And over the decades, I have tweaked my strike call. You know, you don't want to stay the same. You want to upgrade and change a little bit. So my strike call has evolved over the years. So back in about 25 years ago, the way I would call a strike, I did it out to the side. I would go, huh, out to the side. And then for strike two, I'd go two, which when you're far away, it sounded like I was saying, ooh. So O'Malley comes out one time and he goes, Perry, why did you punch my batter out on strike three? It was only strike two. And I said, no, Tom, it was 0-2 when it was, 1-2 or something. And he goes, no, I heard you go, who? Last pitch. And I said, no, I went, ha. And he goes, no, you went, who? And I went, I went, ha. So we stood there going, who, ha. Who, ha, like that Bugs Bunny cartoon where he's arguing with the umpire and he winds up going, safe out, safe. No, you're out. So yeah, that was pretty funny. Tom O'Malley going, who? And I was like, no, ha. There are some very funny moments out there.
What about like some really unusual things that drew, like, nobody knew what the rule book said? Have you ever encountered something like that where we got to look at the rule book?
Recently, I was working a girls tournament out in New Jersey a couple of weekends ago, the Maria Pepe tournament. You all know who Maria Pepe is. She's the little girl that went to court with the support of the National Organization for Women to fight for her right to play Little League Baseball in 1972. Unfortunately, by the time the ruling came down that, yeah, Little League had to make a space for her, she had already aged out of Little League, so she never got to play. But 60 years later, she's still around, still advocating for girls to play, and there's a tournament named for her in New Jersey. And I was working this tournament, and because it's a tournament, tournaments often have specific modifications for time, length of time. They'll have time limits. You know, in baseball, there's not supposed to be a time limit, but for these amateur tournaments, a lot of them do 1 hour 45 or 2 hours or something. So it came to a situation where the two teams that were vying for the last slot in the championship round were playing, and it was getting very close to the time limit, and the home team was losing by a couple of runs. And so at the time, as soon as the bottom of the sixth ended, I looked at my watch and breathed a sigh of relief, because I hate it when a team doesn't get a chance to catch up like that. So that made it easy. There were 45 seconds left. The visitors would be allowed to come to bat. Well, I was just, sort of waiting between half innings. Plate umpire's job is to count the warm-up pitches, to, just keep your eye out, make sure there are no obstructions, nothing is going bad. Base umpires, same thing. They go to the outfield, they just observe what's going on around, keep a watchful eye on things. So I'm doing this, and I don't see the other team coming out of the dugout. And I see my partner over there talking to them. And I walked over there and I said, come on, let's go. The other team gets their ups. And they go, no, we're not coming out. And I said, well, it doesn't matter whether you do or you don't. The half inning has already started. The time limit has not expired, and they get their, chance, their 3 outs. Well, they raised holy hell about it. I had to call the tournament supervisor. I mean, I knew it was a rule in Major League Baseball that the next inning begins as soon as the previous half inning ends. Basically, as soon as the last the last out is made. And I couldn't imagine it would be any different in high school. I'm not as familiar with high school rules, but I was pretty sure that ethically, it did not make sense to me that a team would be allowed to monkey around with the time limit to prevent another team from coming to bat to give it a chance to score some runs. That really bothered me. So when I walked over there and I learned that this was what was going on, I was very upset, and I got on the cell phone to the tournament director and I said, you need to get over here because we've got a situation. And he actually didn't know the rule either, but thank God he relied on my, 40 years of experience, and I think common sense, which I can't believe anybody could interpret it any other way. Why would you let a team do that? Take advantage of a rule to prevent another team from coming to bat. It just ethically and morally was wrong to me. And I knew that under major league rules that it was not permissible to do that. And I was pretty sure that high school and college had a similar rule. And I called my friend down in Florida, who's like the high school interpreter for the high school association down there. And she backed me up, thank goodness. But yeah, it gets a little tricky sometimes, especially with amateur tournaments where some of the tournaments kind of make up their own rules as they go along. You use the template of high school rules or major league rules, but they will always have modifications for safety. Or when I do adult tournaments, because of the age, some of the older players can't bend over to field ground balls. So, they say if somebody hits a ball beyond the infield, it's this. Things like that. It gets a little funky sometimes, but
Did the other team come back in the inning they were granted?
they came back. They had the tying run on third base, and the catcher, who is just the cutest little girl. I've known her since she was 10 years old. She came to bat, and she hustled her heart out down the first baseline, and it broke my heart out to call her out, because it was this close, but I called her out for the last out, so that tying run didn't score, and they wound up being eliminated. So
in 2017, I went to the SABR thing in New York, and we went out to the Brooklyn Cyclones game, and they had some of the Rockford Peaches.
Yes, Maybelle and Shirley.
Sure, yeah, and I saw they're both still with us, and
yes,
you have been kind of the founder and promoter and fundraiser for the museum in Rockford. And could you tell us about that?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not the founder. I'm a board member. I came on a year after the board had been formed with Maybelle Blair and Shirley Berkovich, who are two of the players who played in the All-American Girls. And Shirley's actually in the movie at the very end. She plays in the scene where the older women are playing at Doubleday Field up in Cooperstown. And she has the line, Dottie, you're being here is bringing us good luck. But yeah, they are the founding members, along with Kat Williams, who is a history professor at Marshall University. And they are the three core members of this group for the International Women's Baseball Center. And yeah, our main project right now is fundraising to build a girls and women's baseball museum in Rockford, Illinois, on the right across the street from the site of Bayer Stadium, where the Rockford Peaches played. And that field has been restored beautifully, and it now hosts a lot of baseball games, a lot of women's baseball tournaments. And we're building this museum and education center to attract more people to the area, to Rockford, because it's undergone a great economic downturn, but is now coming back and positioning itself as a hub for amateur sports. I mean, they have a lot of um, excellent sports venues for swimming, skating, other sports, and they want to be part of what women who are involved in baseball call the golden triangle of women's baseball, which is Wrigley Field in Chicago, because that's where the tryouts for the AGPBL were first held. Wrigley Field and Rockford, which is the home of the Rockford Peaches, where our museum will be, and then Dyersville, Iowa, which is the Field of Dreams, which everybody knows about from the movie and the game that was played there. But again, a lot of women's teams have played there as well. And Field of Dreams has always been very welcoming to the women that have wanted to play there. So those three form a triangle in that area of the Midwest. But yeah, we're getting this museum built. We just passed the zoning board hurdle.
Oh,
We got in, yeah, I mean, all of these processes you have to go
Yeah.
through, very labyrinthine and complicated, and you know, you're bound to engender some hostility from the locals, you know, who view us as outsiders swooping in to take over and, you know, work our black magic, when that's not at all the case. We want to make a home for girls and women's baseball that's going to be something very special. And it's going to have batting cages and training facilities for umpires and an education center. We're working closely with the local Boys and Girls Club, which is just down the street, to provide spaces for neighborhood children to come and play and learn or hang out, participate in interactive activities, all of it, you know, related to baseball, that will give them the tools to work towards jobs in baseball later on in their lives. It will give them a foundation of skills that they can apply when they decide what they want to do after school, you know, to
Well,
become productive adults.
send me the link to how to give money to them, and we'll pass that around.
Sure,
Architecture
thank
and
you.
Others, and
Absolutely.
I'll make a contribution. That's,
Oh, thank
um,
you.
yeah, that's
Every little bit helps.
yeah, this Rockford's not that far from here either. It's probably 5 hours, maybe 5 and a
Uh-huh.
half.
Yeah.
So that might be a
And-
nice jump.
And for me, it's actually very special because I have family in Rockford. My mother's side of the family goes deep back in Rockford history. My great uncle Jim McLaughlin, who has an entry in the baseball encyclopedia, he's one of those weird players who played one game in the major leagues, played one game for the St. Louis Browns in 1932. So he has an entry in the baseball encyclopedia and on Baseball Reference. But he was from Rockford, and he became a clerk of the court there and was a you know, big deal kind of political. He ran for Secretary of State, didn't win, but he lived there, and his family, what remains of it, still there. My cousin Lois, who was married to his son, who is now deceased. But yeah, my roots to Rockford run pretty deep as well. So it's a very special, and also because it all started because of me. I was the parking lot across the street from Buyer Stadium at the time was occupied by two buildings that had been abandoned for 10 years. It was just like this derelict property that we used to park when we were using Buyer Stadium. And I was there changing out of my plate gear one afternoon, and I heard a guy named Greg Schwanke, who was the one that restored Buyer. He did all of the work on fixing it up and returning it to its former glory. He did just such a marvelous job with it. But I heard him pacing around the parking lot on his cell phone talking to somebody. He was muttering to himself, I can't take this property. I'm not a 501c3. 5 days, literally 5 days earlier, IWBC, the International Women's Baseball Center, had received its 501c3 certification. So as soon as he said that, I'm not a 501c3, I can't take this property, my ears perked up. And after he got off the phone, I said, what were you talking about? And he said, well, the guy that owns these 2 buildings has been trying to sell them for 10 years. He can't sell them. So now he just wants to unload them. He wanted to give them to me, but I can't take them. I don't know what to do with them. I'm not a 501c3. And I said, well, you know what? We are. And at that point, Greg was actually on our board. And so I called Cat Williams, our president, from the parking lot, dripping sweat, hadn't even taken my chest protector off. And I said, you need to talk to Greg Schwanke. And they did. And that was the start of the whole thing. 6 months later, we had the groundbreaking ceremony and the whole town turned out. We've since staged at least 3 or 4 weekend events where literally thousands of people showed up to support the project and the All-American girls, and to meet Maybelle and Shirley, and to see a game played at Buyer Stadium. And Rockford has just been so fantastic about supporting the project and getting on board with it. And slowly but surely it's coming to fruition. So we've had to clear a lot of paperwork type of hurdles with the zoning board and getting clearance and EPA inspections and things like that. But we've done it all, and we're now ready to start raising money, because we weren't able to do it really until we got these permissions from certain organizations. So that's where we are now. Our kickoff event is November 1st, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So
Cool.
yeah.
No, that sounds like, you've got the fundraising. I think you'll be successful at, and
We have some pretty energetic and connected people working on our behalf to help make that happen. So we have a lot of optimism about that.
And then the other thing that you've been very involved with is trying to get Maud Nelson into the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Yes. Up until this point, it's been kind of a stealth campaign, but we're about to launch a full-on frontal assault on the Historical Overview Committee to get them to consider her among the 10 candidates from the 2 different eras that are smushed into one, unfortunately, this year, because it decreases. And there are a lot of very worthy candidates for those 2 eras. They're combining the golden years, which are 1950s, with what are called the early years, which are pre-1950. And Maud Nelson, she's a very obscure name now, but I mentioned earlier that back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, all the way through the 20s and 30s, there were women's leagues and teams that barnstormed all over the country, all over the world. And Maud was one of the leaders of that industry. She actually created an industry for women to play baseball and get paid for it back in the 1910s and 20s. She was a very popular pitcher in her day. When she arrived as an immigrant on Ellis Island, she was 14 years old in 1892. And 5 years later, she had hooked up with a men's team and was drawing huge crowds to the ballpark wherever she pitched. And she went on to form her own team of women's players. She combined them with men sometimes, but her métier was forming women's teams and leagues, sending women on teams to play overseas and in Japan, Europe. She was just an amazing woman, and she played and organized and fostered these teams and leagues well into the 1930s. And then she retired and she moved to an apartment close to Wrigley Field, and she would hold these sort of baseball salons in her home. So she was actively involved with baseball well into her 60s and 70s, but she just kind of faded into obscurity because the whole history of women in baseball faded into obscurity. And until Penny Marshall made that film, A League of Their Own, and bless her for doing that, because if it hadn't been for that, so many people would never have realized that women played baseball 50 years ago, now 70 years ago. Not only that, they played before that and played at a very high level, and, got paid for it and were professionals. And there were leagues all over the country that featured women playing that were very successful, what they call bloomer girls leagues. They were everywhere. And people loved watching women play baseball. And I'm not talking about teams like the Blondes and Brunettes or the Dolly Vardens, which were, if anybody knows about them, they were early iterations of women's baseball teams, but they were cobbled together as not as really baseball spectacles, but more as, pretty women in, risque clothing type of things. And some of them were out and out, scams and, ways to prostitute women. Unfortunately, they had some very unscrupulous promoters, but Maude was completely different. She was very serious and very successful. And what she did for baseball, I don't think it can be overestimated, what she did for women back in the early 20th century. And the fact that she's so overlooked now really just bugs me. And Effa Manley has been all by herself in the Hall of Fame since 2006, and that's 15 years, and it's too long. She wants a friend. So we are working on getting Maude Nelson in there, because she definitely deserves it. And she would be only the second woman so inducted. And it's very tough to get women inducted because of the rules of eligibility. And the reason I believe Maude is eligible is through the rules pertaining to executives. So that is, I'm not positing her as a Hall of Fame caliber player, obviously, because she'd never played in the major leagues. And that's one of the criteria. If you didn't play in the major leagues, you're not eligible to be in the Hall of Fame. It's that simple. So we're positing her as an executive because she was a very successful one for a long time and gave a lot of women jobs back then.
Yeah, that seems like a flexible rule that, certainly a lot of non-ball players are in the Hall of Fame.
Well, they have very specific categories. If you're not a ball player, they have the executive category, and what's the other one? Well, it's not writers, because writers don't get inducted any more than broadcasters do. Although a lot of them like to say I've been inducted, but none of them has. They have a display at the Hall of Fame, and they get their awards, the Frick Award and the J. Spink Award, which are the highest honors bestowed on writers and broadcasters. But it doesn't mean that they're in the Hall of Fame any more than I am in the Hall of Fame just because my picture's there, which a lot of people say, oh, this is my friend Perry, she's in the Hall of Fame. And I'll say, no, I'm standing right next to you. My picture is in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
But that's
I
a
was
little
in the
different.
Hall of Fame once.
Yeah. And believe me, it's very humbling having my picture in the Hall of Fame, because I have walked right up to it many times since the Hall of Fame was nice enough to put it on display in the Women in Baseball exhibit. And I stand right next to it, and people walk right by me, and I say, would you take a picture of me next to my picture? And they'll look at the picture of me, and they'll look at me, and they'll look back at the picture, and they'll look at me, and they'll say, that's not you. So I have to convince them sometimes, but it's elevating and humbling all at the same time. I'm in that exhibit on the second floor. I like to say 3 pictures above Gina Davis in her A League of Their Own uniform. She's down at your knees, and I'm at eye level. So I'm actually in the better spot.
Yeah. Well, I know for Maude Nelson, she played for Bloomer Girls, and then League of Their Own. That league was a girls' league, and they wore skirts. But now, you know, at
And
least,
she had a couple of proteges that played for the All-American girls, Rose Gatchok and
Yeah.
another woman named Margaret Giselo, who went on to have to influence 37 major league players. Went to Arizona State University and took dance instruction from her, because she partnered with Bobby Winkles, who was the baseball coach there when Reggie Jackson went, Bob Horner, a lot of
Yeah.
really pretty good players. So Maud's influence extends, you know, for almost 100 years.
but
There's
you know, they've cut now. They don't call them girls anymore. They call them women. So that's a step up. And
yeah.
you have been incredibly generous with your time. And
Oh my gosh, it's
yeah, I
terrible.
know. You're supposed to be on the highway. And
It's Saturday. Luckily,
just gonna
everybody's going to
call-
be in Central Park for the concert, so I won't have to
Oh,
worry
cool.
about.
I'm going to call this part one because I don't feel like we've gotten. It's been so much fun, and I'd like to, you know, have another one at some point in time and catch up with, you know, your efforts.
Thanks,
I-
Tad. Thank you so much for giving me the chance to talk to your members. I really appreciate it. I
Yeah,
always,
we've had a few leave because I think they
well,
budgeted a period of time, and then they
yeah,
had,
it's been almost 2 hours.
but we'll fill them in. I just really, I mean, it's just hard to imagine the courage that it took to, you know, for a demure girl to kind of not just umpire, but all the stuff you did before that and continue to do. And you're just a wonderful voice for not just women, but for baseball, because it just makes it enriches it. And
Oh, thank you for
we
saying.
need fans that are not. We need women fans who are not just rooting for man. And there have been big changes, as I know you know. There's some great sports writers. The woman for the Washington Post, I heard her speak.
Is that Christine Brennan?
It is. Let's see. I wrote her. Oh, Chelsea James.
Oh, okay.
And she is just so articulate and says stuff from just a different perspective. And Katie Wu for The Athletic writes about my team, the Cardinals. There are people in management, the GM for Mariners. It's just that those advancements will affect others, as yours has. And, you know, keep the fight up. Just loved having you and learning about you, getting ready for this. I really thank Ryan for sort of telling me about you, which I didn't know. I didn't know anything about you until he said, we got to get Perry on here, and we finally have.
Thank you,
And,
Ryan.
yeah, he's been a great advocate and a big fan of yours. And so I'd like to finish with, could you sing Car 54, Where Are You? Just one verse.
Okay. There's a holdup in the Bronx, Brooklyn's broken out in fights. There's a traffic jam in Harlem that's backed up to Jackson Heights. There's a scout troop short a child. Crew steps due at Idlewild. Car 54, where are you?
Yeah.
Love it, love it, love the whole thing.
Tootie
Thank
and
you so much.
Muldoon.
Well,
Safe travels.
Thank you, Tad. Thanks, Ryan.
thank you so much.
We'll talk soon, all right?
Yes, yes.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate you staying to
Bye.
the bitter end. I love your Rockford Peaches hat too, Tad.
Thank you.